Thanks for coming. Can you hear me in the back all right? Great. My name is Jack Kittredge. My wife, Julie Rawson, and I farm at Many Hands Organic Farm in Barrie, which is about in the center of the state. We got involved or got interested in the issue of soil carbon, I guess, 2014 or so. Julie went to a workshop, found out the basics of the idea, said this is really important, we've got to get involved in this. I started studying it. I quite agreed that it was incredibly important, and I also thought it was incredibly, I liked the simplicity of the idea, and yet the far-reaching amplification of it that comes if you really follow it through. So I started, I'm also the editor of The Natural Farmer for NOFA, and so I started devoting a number of chapters or a number of issues to various aspects of soil carbon, and wrote a paper for NOFA Massachusetts, as some of you may have seen. Soil carbon restoration, I guess it is. Can biology do the job? And it really, I think, lays out in a very hopefully simple but adequately documented, scientifically documented form that people can take it to, scientists or university classes and so forth, and understand what's going on. So what we're going to do here is we've developed a talk that I think talks both about the initial ideas and science behind soil carbon restoration, soil carbon sequestration, and why farming is crucial to that happening properly. And I'm going to talk about that. And Julie, who's much more the farmer at our farm, is going to talk about the things that we've done to try to maximize soil carbon restoration, the things we've learned, the techniques, the methods, the materials, things that have worked and not worked, so forth. So if that's what you're interested in, that's what we're hoping to deliver to you. I guess I'll just get started. Let's figure out this technology here. Basically, no one would dispute, I think, that American agriculture is great at raising crops. Those are, lines for various countries in North America, countries and regions of the world. North America tops them in terms of number of the crop production systems. But the question really is, are we very good at raising healthy food? And there's some of the increases in chronic conditions in America that have also accompanied that same time period, and we have obviously many problems. And there's this list of some of the health problems that we have, and used to be almost nobody had heard of autism, and all of a sudden 1 in every 36 children has it. Diabetes 1 in 4. These things, when my grandfather had diabetes, it was quite unusual, and now it's not unusual at all. Obesity, major depression, these are all things I'm sure you're well familiar with. And what has changed since in U.S. agriculture since, in the last 2 generations or so? Loss of topsoil, loss of minerals, increase in carbon dioxide, use of chemicals, and scale of mechanization are all things that I think are crucial in that. We're all familiar with topsoil erosion by water, by wind. Soil exposed to air is oxidized. Soil is heavily carbon, and when it's exposed to oxygen, those two, carbon and oxygen, immediately bond, become carbon dioxide. More and more we use massive tillage implements, and that exposes soil to air, and we increase the carbon dioxide load. So this is the cropland erosion of U.S. agriculture by year, and more is happening because of erosion in one form or another, and we're losing many tons per acre. We're losing soil nutrients, loss of minerals in soil. These are various vitamins and minerals that are being lost. And also we are having, we are also having extreme problems with weather in this country that everybody has noticed in the last dozen years or so. I think just wildfires, droughts, floods, incredible storms, and there's impact, of course, on people and on wildlife and on the wilderness that we're all inherited together. What I want to focus on is the greenhouse effect. I think most people are already familiar with. It's basically the fact that sun entering our atmosphere reflects off of the soil and off of the globe and is sent out into the air again, but a lot of it is blocked by the atmosphere, certain gases in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is the primary one, so it cannot re-radiate out into space as much as that would have done, and basically it bounces back and becomes part of our atmospheric load. The buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is unmistakable. I think most scientists, have long agreed with it. Here's data from Mauna Loa after 1958, and here's the bottom picture is thousands of years ago, the carbon dioxide percentage, and you can see it peaks and has peaks and valleys. It doesn't stay steady, but increasingly we are way beyond that limit. The top limit you see is about 300 parts per million. They're about 300,000 years ago, and we are past 400 parts per million now. So we're in uncharted new territory. And most of those carbon dioxide emissions are from man's activities, or anthropogenic is the word for it. How does the declining health of our crops relate to the decline in health of our climate? Is there a connection? And that's what we want to really focus on. Yes, our soils lack carbon, while the atmosphere has too much of it. For hundreds of years, we've been digging and pumping carbon from underground, burning it, exposing soil to oxidizing atmosphere, and putting the carbon that should be in the soil into the air. That means we have dead soil, lacks life. If you pick up soil that looks like that, looks like powder or sand, it has no aggregation, has no moisture, it does not have much life to it. We need to get that carbon back into the soil, first because it causes greenhouse effects, and it came out of the ground as, when soil was exposed to the air, or as fossil fuels when we burned all those fossil fuels that we dug up or pumped out. And secondly, adding carbon to the soil is something farmers are very good at. And by the way, it's also necessary to give us the kind of health we get in our crops. Why is soil carbon so important? Basically, carbon is the basis of all life on the planet. It's the food. It's the basis of the food that all life eats. Carbon also keeps soil hydrated. An acre of soil stores over 20,000 gallons of water for each 1% of carbon it contains. When we had, the incredible floods in Worcester County, what was that, a year and a half ago? 2018. And we had been doing a lot of carbon sequestration practices. I know we had a lot of farms around us were actually shut down they said we just, our soils are standing water. We can't have production this year. Our soils, when we went there 30 years ago, were very shallow, had very shallow soils, and were very low. But I think with what we've been able to do, we were able to get through that year largely because we had carbon in our soils, and that the soils retained that moisture but didn't have it on the surface. They took it underground. Originally, many soils on Earth were 10% or more carbon. That's very rare these days, certainly in agricultural areas. And this carbon-rich world is the one in which plants, animals, and humans, we all evolved. The basic idea of how carbon gets into the soil is photosynthesis. I'm sure everybody studied it and understands the basis of that. First, plants take carbon dioxide out of the air, combine it. First they break it apart into carbon and oxygen using the energy of the sun, and then they combine it with water, which they also separate into hydrogen and oxygen, so that they take the carbon and the hydrogen and make carbohydrates, and they take the oxygen and release that into the air. So basically, plants do both crucial things for us. They refresh the air with new oxygen all the time, which this room could use a little more of.
Then open the back door.
And they also produce all the carbohydrates that all the rest of us creatures on Earth can't produce and have to eat. So plants provide the foods for basically for all of us. And this is a pretty big deal. Incredibly, 15% of all the carbon dioxide in the entire atmosphere of the globe is actually passed through plants annually in this process. So in 7 years or something, you will have passed all the carbon dioxide in the world through plants, through photosynthesis. So it's obviously a very powerful engine of chemical change. How does that carbon get from the plants into the soil? That's kind of the crucial thing that I don't think we learned about in school. I didn't learn about it in photosynthesis and studying all that kind of stuff, and it's what really began to intrigue me. Plants, soil is hungry. There's a huge amount of microbial life to earthworms, small creatures, bacteria, microbes, fungi, so forth, in soil. They all have to eat. They all have to eat carbonaceous products. How do they get those products? The plants make them for them. What we're finding out is that basically plants and microbes have made a deal, made an arrangement called symbiosis, which is very common in life. Bacteria, fungi, and the other soil organisms use their abilities to help plants thrive by providing them food in exchange for bacteria and fungi use their abilities other than providing food in exchange for the carbohydrates. The plants supply the carbohydrates as long as the soil organisms are providing useful services. So the plants make an excess of carbohydrates, make it available to the soil organisms, and the soil organisms find ways that they can help the plants grow stronger and more abundantly and thrive. And what are those ways? Well, the plants provide the carbohydrates by basically exuding them, leaking them out as basically as sugar water, as sap, whatever you want to call it, through the roots into the soil. 20 to 50% of the carbon a plant photosynthesizes is exuded out of its roots that way. The carbon attracts, obviously, there's a bunch of soil where free food, carbohydrates are available. Those organisms, be they worms, fungi, bacteria, whatever, are attracted to that. They eat it, they want more. They realize in their way that stronger plants exude more carbon. They have evolved ways to help plants grow stronger, and that's part of the incredible stuff that science is still finding out about. But more microbes are attracted, come to the feast. Plants thrive with that more microbial and biological support and produce more food, and there's a synthesis happening, and you could look at it as if the microbes, as well as us on the surface, are farming those plants. Who are the microbes? What do they do? How do they help the plants? And how does that affect carbon in the soil? Well, the primary one is probably the bacteria. Bacteria do incredible chemical tricks. I mean, bacteria were the first real live organisms on Earth. They established many of the principles of biology on Earth. But some of the simple ones they do, they fix nitrogen. Nitrogen is abundant in the atmosphere, but very much lacking in the soil. And to get from the one to the other, you have to use energy in some process. Bacteria have found a way to do that. So there are many nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They have developed the chemistry necessary to detect through chemical signals plant disease. And when plants are attacked by some sort of spore or organism, plants send out a signal, and different microbes, including bacteria, have found ways to detect that symbol, create what are essentially plant hormones or plant drugs to feed to those plants in response to those signals and heal them. And that's going on constantly in the soil. phosphorus is a nutrient in the soil that's difficult to get. It usually is attached to rocks or in rock structures. Bacteria have the ability to solubilize that is, to break it into soluble form so that water in the soil can transport it to the plant roots. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ways that bacteria use their chemical abilities to increase the strength and vigor of plants and are rewarded by carbohydrates. These are what I just tried to list. The other primary microbe is fungi. Fungi's strength is not in chemical engineering, but in transport. And they have these incredible networks of hypha, these little thread-like appendages, or whatever you want to call them, that they not only are able to transport water and chemical soluble chemicals long distances through these hypha, they also have the ability to exude enzymes that break things down. And typically a fungi will find a rock, exude enzymes that break it down, solubilize the phosphorus attached to that rock, bring it into its own network, and transport it through those hypha to a plant to make that available to the plant. There are many, many things that we're just finding out about that fungi do, different chemicals that they produce that are useful in plant nutrition and in plant disease fighting. Glomalin, essentially a soil glue that's it's basically from proteins that fungi emit that holds together soil aggregates, is a crucial component of soil health. If you've ever picked up a handful of soil and you saw that one picture there where it was just like sand or like dust, that doesn't have those aggregates. But the aggregates are really, they're about the size of a raisin or something, and they hold it together and they enable many kinds of chemical activities to happen within those aggregates. Those aggregates and sometimes act as sort of clean rooms for bacteria, so they can go into that room, exclude oxygen, exclude moisture, do what they need to do to fix nitrogen or other kinds of things. So they enable a lot of chemistry as well as being, signs of good health. Basically, this microbial symbiosis is what grows stronger plants. If you use a chemical, fertilizer or chemical, pesticide on your soil, you're basically going to be killing and shutting down this whole process, because the plant is not going to be providing, nutrients to bacteria to fix nitrogen if it's getting nitrogen out of a bag that somebody bought in an ag way. And if you're shutting down that whole service that's provided by the plants, because you can do it easier, a plant can get it easier, then you're going to destroy that symbiosis in your soil. You're going to have dead soil. Basically, this is many of you heard of John Kemp, I'm sure. He's a soil scientist and thinker about some of these processes. This is a triangle that he generated, I guess, about plant health. At the first stage, you have a plant which photosynthesizes completely, is going to be able to produce carbohydrates, as I explained in the earlier, such as pectins and other polysaccharides, essentially sugar substances, which build resistance to a number of pathogens and so forth. And that's a simple kind of plant health. But if you want your plants to get healthier, you want them to go to stages 2, 3, and 4. And the stage 2 is where it produces complete proteins, and not all plants can do that. Where it transfers sugar through the roots to soil microbes, who release nutrients in a plant available form. This protein basically increases resistance to insects with simple digestive systems, so they can't actually digest and thrive on the proteins that are in the plant, so they go somewhere else and find weaker plants that have not developed that second stage. The third stage is the storage of surplus energy. If you're really photosynthesizing well, energy is stored in the form of lipids and fats and oils and so forth. They build strong cell membranes for the increased resistance to all airborne pathogens, parasites, disease, and ultraviolet radiation. So you see that kind of glistening glow on the sides of on the leaves and so forth of plants. That's because it has lots of lipids, it has lots of oils, it has this kind of structure that makes it resist a lot of disease, the ways that disease normally penetrate plants. And lastly, the highest stage of plant health is production of plant secondary metabolites. These are the things that they act for the plant as protectants in one way or another to guard against ultraviolet radiation, disease, insect attack. They are also the things that give you flavor, aroma, the things that people like about food that attract us to it. It's the sign that a plant is in really good health, has been photosynthesizing well, that it can produce these kinds of things. It's produced enough excess, just as any human body. Somebody who's really healthy has an excess energy and can help others and so forth. And somebody who's barely getting along, has trouble supporting his or her own body. Well, that's a sort of a theoretical basis for the stages that come with, productive plant photosynthesis, and that's basically what we're talking about. Comes about when you have this symbiosis with with soil organisms. So if you're going to want to move your plant higher in that pyramid, basically it needs stronger photosynthesis. It needs a healthy biodiverse soil, which happens if those microbes are thriving in it. Gabe Brown, I'm sure many of you are familiar with him, a North Dakota farmer who's written a book about farming, very entertaining and very, very thought-provoking. He has these 5 principles of regenerative agriculture. Use the least amount of chemicals necessary. Their use fires, if not kills, microbe helpers. They don't, just as I explained for a minute, keep armor on the soil. That's keep the soil covered, basically, so it doesn't oxidize. It doesn't connect with the oxygen in the atmosphere and lose its carbon through oxidization to carbon dioxide. Grow a diversity of crops, so you want to feed a diversity of microbes, because there are many kinds of critters down there, and some are in different seasons, and some have different tastes, and some have different depths, and all those kinds of things. So you want to not have a monoculture, not just for other reasons, but also because you're not going to be supporting this crucial process of symbiosis. Keep living roots in the soil as long as possible. Living roots are one of the key things that enables the soil microbes to find something to eat when the plants aren't actually photosynthesizing. If they're in the winter or something like that, there's not going to be any food for those microbes unless you have it in roots and other kinds of ways that preserve it in the soil. And keep living animals on the ground, which provide manure with vast microbial populations. So basically on the left there you see the kinds of soil that structure and so forth. It has the aggregates, that has the worms and so forth. That is what we're trying to get to. And on the left you have basically dead soil. If you're that person left and right. Sorry. So that is, as an introduction to the theory, is what we got excited about and tried to do, and tried to figure out how do you, in the Northeast, in an organic vegetable operation, how do you actually do this kind of stuff? How do you make the changes that are necessary? What kinds of equipment is necessary? What kinds of thinking about the soil? What kinds of cropping is necessary? And that's what Julie wants to talk about.
You want to be my clicker?
I will be a clicker if you want.
So practices on mini hands organic farm and our evolving focus on maximizing photosynthesis. We have 55 acres.
Julie, can you take us over there? I just got the recorder.
The recorder, yeah.
Someone was wondering whether we can lower the overhead lights.
Oh, sure, you can turn them off. Sorry, didn't think about that. Does someone know how to turn off the lights? Okay. Gone are the days of just having a switch, right? We have 55 acres. We're in Barre, Massachusetts. It's about 25 miles northwest of here. And we're at 1,000 feet, and we have a lot of ledge. Rocks, trees, and swamp is what we talk about where we are in our part of central Mass. 1,000 feet up, so there's a little higher altitude than a lot of the state also. When we did move in, it was a played-out hayfield. It was part of a larger farm. We did have a reasonable soil organic matter was about 5 at that point, which isn't bad, but it didn't really have much fertility. So over the past, since 1980, we've been really trying to build the soil. We did a kind of I would call it not totally conventional organic, but we were doing a lot of rototilling, didn't use much plastic or any of that kind of thing. Always have had animals to help deal with fertility in that fashion. But we were rototilling and, pretty extensively until about 2014 when we've been trying to get ourselves off of the rototiller habit and have seen amazing results year after year, much better all the time. So these are our potatoes last summer. You can see how beautiful they were. I don't think there was a single potato bug on them. And, back in the day, potato bugs were just like a major problem for us. Okay, Jack. So here are a quick listing of some of our practices that we're presently doing. We're certified organic. We've been that way since 1987. We raise about 3 acres of vegetables. We raise about 1 acre of fruit, large and small fruit. We have grassland of about 7 acres, which is alternately hay field and pasture for chickens, turkeys, and cows, all in kind of a big circular, circusy kind of movement. And we have 44 acres of woods. So we do soil tests with Logan Labs every year and, check in on our mineral balancing and add soil amendments as necessary. What we find at this point in time is that we're generally still lower in sulfur. Sulfur is an anion. Cations are more likely to stay in the soil, as your organic matter gets better. Anions are a little harder to keep in the soil, and so we're still struggling with sulfur addition. And then a little bit of potassium. We're sometimes a little low on potassium, and not so much, though. We just do a little bit of the mineral balancing. Animal integration, cows, pigs, turkeys, chickens, in the veg, in the fruit, in the hay fields, in the woods, before and after crops. Got to be 120 days between when the last animal shits on the soil and you harvest a vegetable from it. So we have to pay attention to those kinds of things. But we do a pretty serious integration of animals throughout the year as much as possible. We don't have any tillage equipment anymore, though we this last year through one of the USDA MDAR acre grants, we'll be able to get a toolbar with a ripper opportunities on it, implements that we've been using very successfully, and we're very excited about that. We have a tractor. It's a Ford 2120. Was it 1960s?
1980s.
1980s. Okay, I guess our old one was 1960s, but it's got 4-wheel drive, and it's a nice good tractor with a bucket. And we use hand mowers, and we use a rotary mower on the back of our tractor. We also have, we use a ground-driven rake to harvest our hay and then just store it in a hay barn. So reasonably low-tech. We use lots and lots of mulch these days. We do make fungal homemade composts, not as diligently as we used to because we don't seem to need them as much as we used to. Cover crops wherever possible, in-season, pre-season, and post-season. We were better about that in 2018 and 17 than we were in 2019, but we were better at mulching in 2019. So always the guess, they're trying to manage everything and do it all perfectly. Never quite happening. Most recently, we've bought some silage tarps to use as a no-till opportunity to come in. We've struggled with grass encroaching ever since we've gone no-till, and that's been a big one to get rid of the grass. Silage tarps have been very helpful, putting them down differing amounts of time depending on what time of the season to basically kill that grass and just leave a nice structure to plant into. cardboard and hay, chips, cardboard and leaves. We put a lot of that down, particularly around our perennials. And we've been a new exciting thing this last year that we have a lot of perennials all over our farm. I mean, it's a hayfield surrounded by woods. It's very pristine and very raw, I would say, in a lot of ways. But so there are a lot of perennials along the edges of the fields, which aren't very big. But we've actually integrated some perennial strips right into the. Now that we aren't rototilling the whole farm, you can do all sorts of things, and we've noticed an amazing improvement of biodiversity by having these perennial strips. And then for the last several years, especially after we took a while back in the day to get our calcium levels up, and calcium was a big issue for us. It is for a lot of farms. You really want to have an 80% base saturation on your calcium, 70 to 80. Ours is more around 50. That's one of the things you want to check when you're doing your Logan labs, or however I prefer those over UMass, but you need to really get that calcium into the soil. Some places have calcium in the soil, but in the bedrock, but we don't really. So that was a real deficiency for us. So anyway, since then, we've really been working with John Kempf and the Advancing Eco-Agriculture. He's a young scientist who is really top of the line, figuring out stuff all the time, and he puts together a lot of mineral and biostimulant and inoculant kind of mixtures, and you can really spray them on the leaves of the plants to really enhance that photosynthesis and really bring it up to peak optimum performance, using really very small amount of material. It's much cheaper than in the past when we were buying lots of rock powders. Okay. So here's a picture of our cows on our vegetable field a couple winters ago. Okay. And there they are out in the orchard. So, we alternately run cows and chickens or turkeys through the orchards, and that really helps build the fertility under the trees. Okay. This is just a little picture of our turkeys, just putting them out on pasture this summer when they were like a month old, and they kind of run along the sides of the gardens, but you see all this great stuff in here to eat, but we also harvest them a little bit of comfrey every day and throw it in for them. And if you're a poultry grower, or really a lot of animals like cows really like comfrey too. It's very high in protein, high in a lot of minerals, and they just go crazy over it. It's just so fun. They just attack it like, oh my God. So it's just, the herb of choice for the turkeys. Okay. Here's a picture. This is mostly to show you, again, how these turkeys we kind of ring them around the edges of the fields and keep them close. And then when it's time, when the harvest is over, we can run right through the fields and get the benefit of them. They're getting all this wonderful. You can see how luscious this grass is, and really helps with their nutrition. I just want to show you this celery right here too, which was a really outstanding year for celery for us. It's not the easiest plant to grow, but we're finding things like celery are just doing much, much better now with our heightened fertility. Okay, Jack. And here are the turkeys, like at the end of the season, so we just run them right through the beds, and they clean up what's left, and then they fertilize it for us. Okay. And this is a picture of chickens. We had some corn in here that the raccoons, it was too far from the house, and our dogs were too lazy, and the raccoons got all the corn. I mowed it all down, and we're bringing the chickens down through there. It's nice. I love to have this kind of lots of stuff on the soil here. That's just the nuts for the microbes. Okay. And here's a picture of our pigs in the woods, also doing some service there. They're a little more destructive in the fields, but we help. They can get a lot of their food from the woods, and I think also bringing them in there for short periods of time in a small area, having them disrupted, and then the woods come back even stronger, and it's good for everybody. Okay. And here they are on their way out. They're on the edge of the field, just as they're sadly went to slaughter about 3 days later. But we just have this mobile home for them. You want to back it up once? just mobile home for them that we drag with the tractor and then put up a new fence around them and let them work a certain area. So if you can be really creative with your livestock to help them. Of course, they're part of the crops, but also they help the vegetable crops, and it's a nice symbiotic relationship. Okay, so here's Claire with our new ripper bar, and these are just S-tines on here, and they just drag through the soil. And so rather than tilling it all up and really destroying the structure, and one of the major things that gets destroyed when you're tilling is the mycorrhizal fungi, because they are like an internet, they're a web. And if you can just go through and destroy a tiny little area, like, I don't know, are they 2 inches wide, do you think, Jack? Those S-tines?
Probably less than 2 inches.
Less than 2 inches.
Metal, yeah.
What we noticed, and one of the things that first of all, it cut down our bed preparation, big time. But what we also noticed is, I think all those years of tillage that we probably had a plowman, and we did some years of no-till, and things were doing well and doing better than they were. But once we added the ripper to this, and then opened up that soil and really added more oxygen in the soil, I had one field this year that over the period of a year, the soil organic matter went from 10 to 12, 2 points in a year. And most of them went up by at least at 1 point. So we're very excited about that piece of equipment. All right. And this is the Rogue Hoe, which is, I think, if you are doing a lot of no-till or low-till and a lot of handwork, it's very heavy here, and it does some of that chopping for you. It's just a really nice, sturdy hoe for serious working, serious chopping. Okay. And this is our son and our son-in-law unloading hay. We lucked into 62 bales of somebody's old hay that they made that they couldn't get rid of this fall, and went and picked it all up. But this will all we use copious amounts of mulch, and it's pretty expensive to pay for it especially if you're a farmer, but if you can get it for free, and if you're in a farming area, oftentimes people have spoiled hay and you can get it for reasonably cheap. So that's that. And next, this is just showing you, this was trying to deal with the grass, and we have somewhat permanent fences that will have tomatoes, green beans, peas, cucumbers, kind of change families from year to year. But then the grass grows up under these fences. And so this was the winter of 2018 into 19. We just went out and laid this cardboard in really thickly under the fence line, and then hay on top. And then you come back in the spring. It's all cardboard under there. A lot of this was grassy, had grown back in, and killed most of that grass. And the thing with cardboard is that worms love it. They go absolutely crazy. It's their favorite food. I like to use brown cardboard, not the shiny stuff. People say, well, how about the glues? And my answer is, well, first of all, the certification in Massachusetts, they'll accept it for certification purposes. But if those worms have totally digested that, and then we had very low earthworm numbers before we started being no-till, and now they're just, every shovelful's got 25 in them. They're everywhere. They absolutely love that soil. And the soil in this area of the farm right here is just black and sticky and, just absolutely beautiful. All right. So here's another, this is just kind of show you the, Rawson hay, this is all old moldy, shitty hay that we got. But you can put it down, and that chard, you can see where it's done over there. I think we mulched our chard like 3 times this year, heavily. The more biological activity you have, the more they eat up the mulch, and then you have the more mulch you have to add. So it really just starts to really make the system roll. And then that's how you're able to build that soil organic matter so quickly also. Okay. I don't know if I go over this later, but this was that perennial strip that I told you about. And there's some New England wild asters, and there's some Jerusalem artichokes and various herbs and stuff along in here. And then the cucumbers were here and the corn on this side. But boy, we'd go out there to harvest cucumbers, and it was almost deafening, the amount of pollinator activity that was going on in this corridor here. I mean, it was so exciting to go out and work in this area. And the corn was fantastic. The cucumbers, those cucumbers, we lasted through the entire season. We didn't have to replant them at all. But I just was just so impressed by what adding those perennials, which attract all those insects. And then I assume there's a lot of cool stuff going on underground too, and because of the more kind of things you have growing, the more kind of microbes you have, and the more they work together, and you have, instead of having, let's say, a string quartet or just a soloist with a piano, you've got this full orchestra with, you've got one of Verdi's, the Aida, triumphal scenes from Aida with, the elephants on stage, 1,200 singers. You have 1,200 singers for that? I don't know. It was amazing. But you can see, the difference between, or a certain person, playing their flute, or, just a soloist, how you can just build this incredible system, and then, you just have this amazing process going on. Okay, enough of that one. This is just showing squash with lots of hay in this particular field, and you can see how beautiful that soil is under there. But what we came through in this particular field is we pulled back the hay and the cardboard, and then just planted the plants in, and then kind of pulled it back again on top of it. This was another field that had gone way to grass, so that was our strategy there, and that really worked to try to cut back on the grass problem. All right, and just to show you how much hay we used. Hay everywhere. This actually moved it outside. This is a hoop house where we grow greens in the fall and winter, and then tomatoes and melons and such in the summertime. But there's this guy, David Johnson, who's a Johnson Sioux composter. It's a fungal, it's a glorified container with leaves that you keep in there for a year. And then you get this really rich fungal compost that has a lot of properties that are very helpful. So, but anyway, it was a hassle to have it in there, so we moved it outside and just fill it full of leaves and clean it out once a year. Basically, my approach is quicker and dirtier, the better. So that's how we end up running things. Okay, this is just a shot of some of our Korean natural farming compost, another fungal compost that you can raise. And there's a write-up on the NOFA Mass website, if you type in Korean natural farming, as an article I did that talks exactly about how to do that process. But, I haven't been doing so much with the fungal compost lately because it doesn't seem like we need them so much, because we have so much going on right on in situ, as it were. Okay. Here's a picture of this. These were basil and then wood chip mulch, and then planted clover on top of the wood chips on a rainy day. And so you can see how shiny these leaves are. Jack was talking about those plant secondary metabolites. They just get shinier and smellier and thicker and meatier. I mean, a lot of our chard this year, I felt like I was cutting steaks, it's like steaks, beefsteaks. The really incredible and the incredible nutrient mineral content that things can have. So this is just an example of one of the ways you can do mulching and cover cropping on top. That's crimson clover, and you can plant that as soon as the plant is tall enough to be able to tolerate. You don't want to plant it too early or you'll choke it out. But if your plants are maybe this tall, you can go in there. Ideally I would mulch, and then I would plant the cover crop on top of that, short ones. Okay. And there's some Swiss chard also done with that kind of behavior, mulching and then clover on top. Okay. These are some fall cover crops. This year we went crazy and got 13 different kinds of cover crops, and this was an area that we planted into cover crops maybe 1st of August and just threw all this mix down. I'm very excited to see what's going to be here next year when they died out. Okay. So this is those, you saw those asters earlier when they were shorter, but there was a day in September, and I guess the Monarchs do their thing in a very short time period, right? But I went out there, and I was just standing there talking to somebody who'd come by. and we started counting monarchs. And I think there are 4 maybe on this picture, or 5, but there were actually 7 had alighted on those flowers. And it was just like the most beautiful thing. It was a very beautiful moment this past fall. Okay. All right, preparing beds for lettuce after garlic, mow tarp, rip plants. So I just wanted to show you a little bit of succession stuff if you're trying to figure out. Lots of times we will plant a crop, and then, well, what do you do after that if you want to be no-till? So this is that. Go ahead, Jack. After the garlic was out, you can see there was a fair amount of grass had grown up in it, even though we had mulched it pretty heavily. So we mowed it all down. That's the first step. Second step is to put down the tarp, and you have to use your imagination a little bit because some of the mowing and some of the tarping aren't exactly in the same place that the lettuce ended up, but it's showing you the process. So these are these black silage tarps. We just put them down, and then we dig a little bit of dirt and throw it on top to hold it down so it won't blow away. Okay. And then that's our pot plants over there too, by the way. But we're very proud of them this year and make wonderful hemp salve, which we have for sale if you want some. The tarps, this is the process of rolling up the tarps. It's actually somewhat of a challenge to figure out how to do that, but we just kind of fold them over like big bed sheets. They're extremely heavy. So that's one step. And next step. Just going to, go ahead. And folding them over. You can see a lot of this stuff, there's still material here, but it's really, a lot of it's broken down really nicely. Okay, Jack. And they're there. They were very happily got into the tractor bucket. Okay. So that's the tarp. And then here's Claire going through with the ripper. And you can see, again, this is another location. It's not that location, but I didn't have a picture of it. And it kind of digs up. In this particular place, we had a little more sod, but it kind of digs up and draws a nice stripe in there. Okay. And then, so this is actually what that looked like, that same place we were at right before we plant. Okay. And there we are. And Max was a little heavy always on our liquid fertility. He always measured it a little heavier than I wanted him to, but he's going along and watering in those cracks, and Josh right there is just putting in these lettuce plants. And they're very easy to transplant into that. We planted out 2 bushels worth of garlic in 15 minutes this year. I just pop into the soil really nicely with that. Go ahead, Jack. And here's Mario. Again, a little better shot of the transplant operation. Okay. And then there's the lettuce later on. You can see how it's looking in the field. Okay.
What are those guys doing to your hemp?
Oh, they were just very excited about it. And then we actually have put up a couple more hoop houses in the meantime, so they're kind of put them up through these beds, but, really nice crops. You see there's a little grass and a lot of trash and little weeds here and there, but, nothing's really bothering those plants, and we can pull a few on the way by, but clean cultivation is not what it's about. It's just about making sure that the locals aren't, overwhelming the folks that you're trying to raise for sale. Okay. So, priorities. This is John Kempf again for maximum economic performance while rebuilding soil health. Adequate water. So, you need to have adequate water, but adequate water changes drastically depending on how much soil organic matter you had. 20,000 gallons per acre, is that you said?
For every 1% of
Yeah, for every 1% of soil organic matter. So everybody's freezing to death now? Sorry.
Just me.
Okay, well, I was rolling up his sleeves too. But, so adequate water means, adequate soil moisture. So the better, sturdier soil you have, it's spongier, more organic matter, more sponge, more opportunity to take in water when it's a heavy rain, which we get a lot of these days, right? And more opportunity to hold on to that water when we get into drought, which we have a lot of these days also. So that's it, adequate water. Adequate CO2, active photosynthesis. So when check me if I get this wrong, but when you have a lot of plants photosynthesizing, there's this loop of oxygen and CO2 happening right at the soil level, right? Can you explain that?
You get carbon dioxide is released by the soil. The healthier soil you have, the more microbial activity. And of course, they breathe like we do, and they exhale carbon dioxide. So in a field of corn or something, if you measure the carbon dioxide at maybe a foot high compared to 10 feet high, it'll be much heavier carbon dioxide, low, and the plants have evolved to adapt to that because they have the stomata that picks them up on the underside of their leaves. So they are designed by nature to pick that up. Is that what you?
Yeah, and so we want a lot of carbon dioxide in order to grow plants. They need a lot to grow, but once they get that into their systems, and again, correct me if I mess this up, they then send that extra carbon down into the soil to feed the microbes. And so it's not like we're contributing to climate change when we have more carbon dioxide happening in our fields because we have this powerful engine going, but it's the fact that it's actually, the bottom line is that it's feeding it back into the soil.
Sequestering it at no cost to us by using the process, yeah.
So we want to have that good carbon dioxide, and it happens when we have a good soil armor, when we have healthy microbes, when we have adequate water. Third thing, adequate sunshine. So obviously we can't do much about the fact the sun's shining today or it isn't. But what plants do when they become more healthy is they put furriness on. They'll actually little hairs that you'll see. As you see plants get healthier, all this crazy stuff happens. They get all these ragged edges because every edge, it's a fractal situation. The more ways that they can collect sunshine, the more they can photosynthesize. So they start to, ridge out. They start to put on these hairs, and they do all these things that I think when they're greener, also they attract the sun more appropriately. Is that correct? I think so. Yeah. So that's another thing. Adequate sunshine, and so we want to do that, and supporting photosynthesis and minimizing photorespiration. So photosynthesis happens when you're building the plant's body, but when it gets too hot, it will photorespirate. So it basically starts to pant, right? And if you have healthier plants, they can tolerate about 6 degrees more heat than unhealthy plants. And at the end of the season, when you're worrying about frost, they can also tolerate about 6 degrees more of cold than normal, regular plants. So what we're doing is we're optimizing our ability to keep photosynthesis going, because when plants start to photorespire, they stop growing, and they're just taking care of themselves, trying to stay alive. So that's one of these. This is one of these fantastic things. So he says then the fourth thing is the foliar minerals is needed to support production of chlorophyll to promote photosynthesis. These are the big four, but I'll talk about them on the next slide. And then biological inoculants to the root system. We want fast root growth. Inoculants really help the roots grow quickly. And then cover crops, and then mineral amendments in the soil. So these are kind of the order of priority, if you think about things. And I think, what we've been taught is, you go out there, you get your soil test, you put your minerals down, right? That's number one. And then all the other stuff kind of follows. But it's interesting to think about it in this order. Okay, I'm good. So chlorophyll supports photosynthesis. Magnesium is the center of the atom. Around the center of the magnesium atom is the four nitrogen atoms. And then iron is not part of chlorophyll, but John talks about it like as a wrench. It's the mechanism by which we need the nitrogen, which is the enzyme, to help put the chlorophyll together. It's the foundational enzyme. And some other things I said there. And then manganese, which is important to split the H2O, the water molecule, into H and OH, which is the first process in photosynthesis. So if you don't have enough manganese, which most of us don't have, it's another one. Manganese, one thing John said, manganese and iron in New England soils, you can count on the fact that you don't have enough. Even though your soil test might say that you have high iron levels, it's usually totally bio-unavailable, especially if you're not, cranking a healthy soil. So manganese is one of those things that you want to make sure that you are adding to the system somehow. The mineral manganese, although I add it somewhat to the soil, it's much more available if it's done in a foliar fashion. So those are important things. And Photomag is that particular product that I use. When I go out and spray that Photomag, I can notice an immediate difference within hours. Plants are greener, they're growing faster, they're looking healthier. So we do that once a week. Okay. And then the foliar sprays and foliar sprays and also transplant solutions. These are some of the things that we get. I work with AEA, started doing that last year. I've been buying their products before and also buying agrodynamics products, which are really very good products too, similar products. But we have specific recipes for each of these particular times in a vegetable's life, in a vegetative vegetable or a fruiting vegetable, and then all these other fruit and tree fruit and small fruit. And post-harvest fruit also. Taking care of those trees, remembering the trees are worn out. You know, for the mother who had sextuplets, right? She's really tired and she has to rebuild her body before she can have kids again next year. Hopefully she won't have any next year if she had sextuplets, but in case she got pregnant again. So anyway, you have to really think about the whole, with trees and fruit, you have to think about the whole year for them in a way that you don't necessarily think about, particularly for vegetables. Okay. All right, here's the pudding. This is where I like to show off. So that's Mario picking our daily crate full of, what kind of mushrooms? Wine cap mushrooms that we got this year. And I don't remember ever inoculating our land, except that of late, we just have wine cap mushrooms everywhere on the farm. And we have a lot of wood chips, but we've had wood chips for a while. And I just think it's part of the overall fertility that's happening on our farm right now. So things are really just cranking. So go ahead. There's a picture, and there's just a picture of them in the crate. Just fantastic. Side benefit, all these free mushrooms that we didn't do anything particularly for. This is a shot of spinach to see how it can look really healthy. Go ahead. Strawberries were out of this world this year. Go ahead. These are peas. You can see the massive number of flowers on these peas, and that's another thing with manganese, which is manganese really supports the fruiting crops to fruit when they're supposed to. Okay. And here we are there. That baby is not dead, just sleeping sleeping in the pathway. But the peas, huge, tall peas and amazing crops this year. And one more pea shot right there. So those were sugar snaps got up to be about 12 or something, 10 to 12 feet tall. Okay. And lettuce heads over 1.5 pounds, many of them. Just some of them were 2 this year. Okay. Cucumbers, that was those cucumbers I showed you that we harvested for the entire season without having them, back in the day, 3 weeks maybe before they get some disease and then they're out the door. Go ahead. And I think that's that same shot, but that's them on the hoof. Okay. More of our chard, that tasted like beefsteak. Go ahead. And really nice kale also. And you see these dandelions here, back up once, Jack. We have a lot of dandelions out here too, and of course dandelions are probably the best vegetable for you out there. And we just harvest those and CSA them and dry them and make tea out of them and have dandelions for everything. They're just one of those wild things that you should really, don't get rid of them. Use them. They're just so good for you. Okay. And this is what kind of kale that's called? The lacinato kind of kale. But again, you can see this all these opportunities for photosynthesis that these plants say, okay, let's go crazy, kids. And they put all these opportunities out there to photosynthesize. Okay. Beets were really good this year. Yeah. And those are those potatoes again. This is really the best year for potatoes we ever had. It was so exciting. Just go out and look at them. And, when things get really healthy, there's an aura and a sheen, and there's this iridescence. And if you want to get high, just go out and hang out with your really healthy vegetables. Okay. That was one plant of potatoes. Okay. And a really nice, sturdy, well-structured broccoli. You want your plants like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. You want them to build a nice big body before they start putting in their fruit, and this is a good example of that. Okay. basil that really, stayed really healthy. What I didn't get around to well this year was getting cover crops under these. They would have done much better with clover under them. I just didn't get to it. Okay. And these pepper plants just loaded, like every plant just loaded with peppers until the end of the season. Okay. And there's that celery. We had walked through here the picture earlier, but I really like this beautiful kind of stepwise picture of all these crops coming together. Go ahead. And then a later picture of the beans and then the celery and some tomatoes in the background. Go ahead. And radishes in the fall, again, bigger, tastier, healthier than we've been able to grow in the past. Okay. That's parsley, which was just out of this world also this year. Okay. And carrots. All right. And this is a bunch of stuff we had. We pick stuff and throw it up on the floor of the barn for the CSA, but just a kind of a beauty shot. Go ahead. And this is our poor peach tree. So our biggest problem this year was that we did all these sprays on our fruits, specifically our apples and our peaches that we were focusing on. We did sap analysis with AEA. They sent it off to Denmark or something, and they tell you what else you might need. But this particular tree, and we had, all of our peach trees, we had to get all sorts of support under them so that they wouldn't break all their branches. Go ahead. And people are up enjoying the harvest of peaches. Okay. And then you can see the quality of them on the ground there. Okay. And there's our Prima apple tree, which is, that one, how old is that one? 25 years old, or, I don't know. But,
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. And the apples, still don't look that great, but the flavor is getting really up there. I mean, the flavor change in a well-raised fruit it's really something to die for. Okay. And some really nice grapes. Go ahead. And some honey. This year we got 10 quarts of honey, and our bees didn't die. They might be dead in the spring, but anyway, it's our first year to actually harvest honey after 4 years of trying. And I think they weren't so far away from that perennial strip that I showed you, and I think it was just things went well for them. Okay. And the dirty laundry. Okay, grass when not enough mulch or when the land was dirty the year before, and bindweed, seemingly ubiquitous this year. I think it comes in on the hay. We had a lot of bindweed. Okay, so a couple pictures of that. Really struggled. Here's something we didn't get weeded adequately and didn't get mulched in time. Just so you don't think that everything's beautiful on the farm. And then bindweed everywhere. So that's a little bit of a trick, dealing with the bindweed. You haven't figured that one out yet. Okay. Food preservation. All right, there's a day in August. Oftentimes we just load all this shit on the table and then just work like crazy for 3 hours. Really fun. Okay. And there's some of those. We made actually 295 quarts of applesauce this year. This was really wonderful. We have it every day, breakfast, lunch, and supper, whenever we feel like it. Okay. And this was one day. Okay, this is what we brought in to preserve that day. There are tomatoes and apples and corn. And I don't know, there might be something else over there in the back. I can't remember what it was, but it was pretty overwhelming, actually, for several days. I don't know, 6 weeks or something. Just bring all this stuff in, and, what you couldn't sell, we'd preserve and sold later frozen or whatever. Okay. And there's Marge and me with our hemp. Marge was she's the registration coordinator. You might have noticed her today, but she's my hemp expert. Okay.
We talk about drying.
Huh? Drying, yeah. So do people know about the Excalibur dryer? It's a little box, and you can put 8, I think, trays in it, and 9 trays, and just put whatever it is you want to dry in it. And it's just another way to preserve food. So we make
great yogurt. It's great.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can just take the trays out and put the yogurt in too. Good point. Power of cover crops. Oh, so this is an interesting observation that this deck is like, how many feet off the ground is it? 20?
That's the first.
The second floor.
Oh, probably about 15 or something.
Yeah, 15 feet. But it's amazing to me how seeds, I mean, every year I go through and I weed the flower boxes religiously. But this one, there was a lot of clover in this one. I just kind of left it. And I just want you see, this was at the end of the season after several frosts, I think. And you can see that these petunias are starting to die. But they just have this clover in here. And then 2 boxes down, go ahead and move the next slide. No clover, same day. And see the difference between the health of those plants. And then would you go back to that other one again? The health of these plants, which reminded me how important it is to, if possible, to get some of those cover crops going in your plants. You're going to have much healthier plants. And you just have, besides all the work that the hay or leaves or straw or whatever it is you're using for your mulch, you've got all this green thing going and really adding more, excitement to the picture. Okay. So multi-species winter kill cover crops late August to late September. Be sure to do that if you can. Intersowing crimson clover and some smaller cover crops early. You don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to overwhelm your vegetables. It's really nice under brassicas, tomatoes, corn, anything that are a little bit taller. It's very easy to cover crop under them without trouble. But I've done them under peppers and under basil and some of those shorter things too. Using silage tarps strategically through the season, cardboard and hay, leaves, wood chips, and maximize keeping the growing areas covered, living or dead. Chris Nichols, who was at the summer conference this year, said, in this part of the country, maximum photosynthesis, maximum carbon sequestration. You want to have something green growing 260 days of the year. So if you can go home and think about that in your system, that's like you get to take off January, February, and maybe half of December, half of March. Otherwise, you should have green things growing in your fields, and that's going to be, maximizing your carbon sequestration potential. And that's how we can all save the earth. So that was the last. That's the answer. Green growing crops, as many different ones as possible, as long into the season as possible. And so the customers, what did I say? Love you more every Friday. It's like unwrapping Christmas presents. As a first-year member, I'm very pleased with your selection. Each week seems like Christmas. The best surprise has been the rhubarb. I picked up my first ever organic CSA share from Imhoff. Produce was so beautiful. We are so impressed. Not only was it photo-worthy, it was delicious. We've enjoyed our oven-roasted root vegetables, sautéed garlicky beet greens, blah, 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 oregano and eggs. Thank you for providing such high-quality food. And there's another one from another year where the woman says, well, my husband even likes the squash. And he said he thinks it's just because he likes squash now, and I think it's because it's your squash. So it's just, it's so exciting when people get so excited about their food. And customers... This one woman who was one of our SNAP participants, she just like, I am so grateful to you. I'm so grateful. You have changed my life. She was a woman when she came, she sat in the truck and her son helped, sign her up, and she was really very, hardly mobile. And those are the kind of things where it's like, wow, this is really worth it. We're having such a good time. People are eating well, and we're saving the earth. So, is there anything else, Jack? That's it. So we have 20 minutes for questions if you'd like. Does someone want to turn the lights back on? So any questions for Jack or me? Yeah.
So do you have a sense or any data on sort of how much carbon could be sequestered this way, what the potential is for...
I think Jack does.
Yeah, that's a lot. What the 16-page paper I wrote is a lot about that. Some general warnings first. Carbon measuring is an incredibly difficult feat, and I don't think our science is up to it yet. for one, how deep you go. For another, carbon is exceedingly promiscuous, you might say. I mean, it's in the soil. Microbes eat it. They exhale it as carbon dioxide. It goes off. You're going to take it high or low in the air. You're going to take it in the morning and the afternoon. I mean, I don't think we have a good way of measuring carbon, and that's a problem. But I don't think you just ignore that problem. The best studies I have seen would suggest that if you do the kind of maximum work you can, probably in a grassland where there's grazing, you're going to have the best return on carbon because it's a perennial, it's growing year round. The herbivores, usually cows, or it could be bison or other kinds of water buffalo, whatever, are manuring it, so it's very healthy and growing. That's probably, you could probably get 6, maybe something like, I forget the figures, I guess, but something like 6 tons per acre per year could actually be sequestered there. I think the best figures I found for what we tend to grow, which is vegetables, is maybe 3 tons per acre per year, something like that. But again, to use numbers like that and throw them around, there's so many, and those are from different studies, but those studies don't tell you necessarily whether they use chemicals or not, how deep they went to do the testing. None of these things, there's no standard for carbon testing, so that's why we tried to, play around with this in our own. The best result, I think, to knowing that you're doing a good job as carbon is the pudding. Do the crops taste good? Do they smell good? Do they look good? Do people compliment you on the stuff? Are they, productive? If you're doing that, you can't be doing. You have to be putting carbon down there because that's what's driving the whole system. But to build it around payments and carbon, taxes and payments and stuff like that seems crazy at this point. I just don't think we know enough of what's going on. So that's why we geared it more towards, the practitioner and the farmer and knowing what you're doing by looking at the results you're getting. We have a whole system in NOFA Mass. We developed a whole bunch of what I call proxy tests that look at the results of this thing, soil aggregation, earthworm population, just 10 or 12 different tests you can use to see the results of carbonation in your soil, but they don't measure carbon directly. I don't think you can do a very good job of it.
Don't you think? So yeah, it's difficult to measure carbon, and who knows when we'll be able to do that. But if you're assessing a farmer's ability to sequester carbon, looking at the biological community there, so doing a biological assessment and measuring, your photosynthesis based on bricks, those two simple tools, in your opinion, would directly correlate with high levels of carbon sequestration.
Yeah, that's more what I would talk about as proxy tests, because the advantage is that you don't have to send that stuff off to the lab. You can do it right yourself. You can get results right away. You can say, all right, last year at this time I tested this, and this year at this time I tested this, and I've got this kind of improvement or not, so you know whether you're getting improvement.
Biology. You can count biology.
Yeah, biology is doing the job for you, no question about
They
that.
said you can count it,
Oh, you count like earthworms or.
No, actually do a microscopic, biological assessment. Like soil food web.
Yeah, well, they've got you take a certain size sample and you can measure the carbon dioxide being exhausted over 24 hours or something, and little tiny guys you'll never see are doing that. So yeah, there are lots of ways you can measure those effects, and that's the best I think that we can do. I don't know if that's strong enough to convince politicians to build carbon payment schemes around that. I'm skeptical myself, but for farmers, that's very useful stuff.
Along the same line, you said originally that original soils might have had 10% carbon.
That's what a lot of people say. Yeah.
So are there like native soils where we tested and determined that, seen it?
Not much native anymore. Australia is probably one of the most latest places settled by any agricultural processes and stuff, and that's what people report from. What was that? 1780s or 670s or something. They were settled, report at that stage that they had. I've heard
Was it
even
down
higher.
to 20, wasn't it, in Australia? I thought I remembered 20% in Australia.
I had heard, I had seen that figure 20%, but that seems like an extreme. I don't know. Nobody really knows.
How does 3 tons per acre compare, do you think, to 10%? I just have no feel for.
Well, I'd have to get some of my notes out on that to really give you a good answer. The 10%, of course, is a built up, and if you do 3 tons per acre, you're going to lose some every year, but you're going to build it up slowly. And it wouldn't take that long to get to 10% if you just had if that was your goal to build up carbon in the soil through natural biological processes, not through pumps and all kinds of force-fed stuff, but just use nature to do it. I think you could probably get back to 10% in most healthy climates. Again, you have to have the temperature in the water, the moisture and the heat and so forth there, but probably, certainly in a generation, it would not be impossible at all. It's a very, photosynthesis is an incredible process that feeds us all the time and has much more. And it's just a lot to be grateful for. Yeah.
Did you ever experiment with biochar?
We did.
We did one time, yes.
We got it from you. I don't think I did it right, though. I just put it.
I have not seen what I think. I think biochar is a proper accessory to this whole process, but I don't think it drives the whole process. I don't think there's enough carbon in that to do what's necessary compared to what you're getting out of the atmosphere. Where I think it is really crucial is I think usually biochar is made from natural wood clippings and shavings and so forth, and usually because they're grown, they have a structure to them, and that structure has little tiny thousands and thousands of pores and different size holes in that, and I think that may be very helpful in enabling housing for all the microbes, because there's a constant war going on in the soil like everywhere else with life, and big ones are trying to gobble little ones up and so forth, and the more diversity you have in the soil in terms of feed, in terms of structure, in terms of support, hideouts is also actively involved. So I think that it's an active way to help microorganisms survive that struggle, and but I haven't seen good numbers on actual sequestration as a result of that. Yes.
I just want to say one of the things that I would like to say about that we really want to maximize photosynthesis. I guess if I would hope you'd leave with anything from today, it's about maximizing photosynthesis. All the things we can do to do that, and that's where we're going to see results.
Yeah.
When you talk about soil carbon levels, the percentage of carbon, is that analogous with organic matter levels on your soil test? If your soil test is
Yeah, but I think it's about 58% of organic matter is actual carbon. It's a percentage of that. I'm sorry.
It's a percentage of your organic
Yeah.
matter, yeah.
Okay, and then when you talk about maximizing photosynthesis at the surface, is that also included in soil carbon levels? Because I think about what's happening on the surface as a totally kind of a different, as part of the biomass and soil carbon, or carbon found in the biomass. So are you saying that that's also part of soil carbon levels?
When I talk about soil carbon, I'm not talking about the body mass of plants. No, I'm talking free carbon in the soil. There are people who make an argument, and it may well be a good argument, that if you're talking about sequestering carbon and you put it into trees and then you cut down the trees and you make fancy pianos and furniture out of them, that is out of the atmosphere for hundreds of years. And that's true. But I think to be, honest, a lot of that carbon, is also recycled pretty quick. It gets burnt or it gets eaten or whatever. So it's less of a reliable measure. So when I talk about it, I'm just talking about carbon in the soil. It may be in the form of, ancient carbon and fossil fuels and stuff like that. I mean, those are usually pretty deep, and we don't usually talk about those in agricultural situations, but that's where that all came from, a long time ago. Yes?
It's been a few years since I looked at Eric Tonsmeyer's book on carbon sequestration.
The carbon farming book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one with the Chinese on the cover, the Chinese terraces. And trying to remember what I read, which was something like it was easier to sequester carbon in the tropics than in temperate zones. And yet we're worrying about having more water and more heat. Of course, it's inauspicious sequences and amounts, but I was trying to remember why he identified the tropics.
Well, it's pretty simple, basically. I mean, in the tropics, in places like the Amazon or, in Indonesia or places like that, where you have these incredible tropical forests, you have the heat, you have the moisture, you have all the conditions for active growth. The problem is also in the tropics, you have this tremendous life all around, and the carbon mostly gets taken out of the soil through life processes and exhaustion and so forth. So if you were to, it's like apples and oranges. To talk about measuring carbon in say in Brazil versus Maine or something like that, what are you really measuring? You're measuring the carbon that gets deposited today, the carbon that's left over there from a week, the carbon that's there in January. I mean, every location has its own situation. So, yes, you have much faster biological activity in a warm, moist area because those things promote that. But will you end up with more carbon on an annual basis? I don't think anybody really knows that because...
So Eric does his inventory from the soil up. He's not counting soil carbon. He's counting carbon above grade.
If he's talking about carbon in plants...
So he's looking at landscaping carbon and storing carbon.
Yeah.
And he doesn't take a number for what's stored below the surface.
But again, it depends what happens to those plants. And in most tropical situations, plants quickly decay. There's, again, the very fact that there's all these life conditions, that's what eats those plants and destroys them, and carbon is released again. And in Maine, it's frozen all winter, so there's nothing to happen. The tree lays there. So it's just real. I don't know that we have a good measure of any of this stuff. A lot of people out there writing books and making claims and making good arguments, but I don't know that we have what's necessary, a level playing field in any of this stuff. I'm not sure we're going to have it very soon. So it's disappointing to. But for farmers, I don't think it matters. If you know where you are, you maximize your conditions where you are. That's the beauty of having a place in this world. Yeah.
Yeah. One sort of practical detail. You had your 4 steps: mow, tarp, rip, plant. And where in that equation do you mulch and cover crop?
Well, in that case, I planted lettuce, so I didn't mulch it or cover crop it. So they're planting lettuce heads.
Oh, that was
and
just for the lettuce.
Lettuce heads, yeah. So if I was going to mow, tarp, plant, if it was a tomato plant, mulch it right away, and once it's established, plant some cover crops around that in the mulch. And, so the tomato's always ahead of the cover crops. That help?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you notice this year in particular that you had very little pest problem because all your plants were photosynthesizing at higher rates?
Yes, except for slugs. We're still fighting slugs. We're done with potato bugs and a few other things. We haven't seen flea beetles for a while. They used to decimate all the brassicas,
Yeah.
But yeah, our slugs are our remaining challenge. Well, that's in the vegetables. In the fruit, let's see, what do we have in the, I'm not sure who was there in the fruit, but they're not. fruits are a little harder. I
Yeah.
don't feel quite as strong about them.
Yeah, for many years, we thought in our orchard we had plum curculio problems, but I don't know that we're having as much of that. We've had some really productive years with orchard fruits, which we didn't have before. But again, it could be they're old enough to produce now, and they took a long time to come along, so it's really hard to judge.
Powdery mildew? It didn't look like
Yeah.
you had much powdery mildew on any of your...
No, we don't have many diseases in our tree fruit.
I mean,
No.
no, powdery mildew on the
vegetables.
cucurbits. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, finally, but now it's after 12 weeks instead of after 4 weeks.
Okay.
That's the difference.
So you just pushed it back.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of their lives, I think powdery mildew, basically all these diseases that come in to take out a plant are just, that's their job.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it's time, this plant is called it quits, and bring in the fungi. And they're going to do their job, and they're going to, because that's how we recycle.
Yeah.
So, I think it's, so I guess if it was really healthy, maybe we wouldn't get it before it froze. I haven't gotten there yet with the squashes. Yeah, squashes, cucurbits have shallow root systems, so they're a little bit harder to, you have to really be, have to work harder to keep them healthy longer. That's one of the bigger things. The brassicas have these monstrous, you can't even pull out a strong brassica plant. And the more roots they have, the healthier they're going to be above. But you have these very large vining squashes with these tiny little roots under the ground.
Yeah.
And probably a lot of that has to do with breeding, I suspect. I don't really know. But, why. I wonder if the more primitive cucurbits have, more extensive root systems. I don't know. But, yeah.
Your silage tarps.
Yeah.
How big are they, and why are you using those rather than clear plastic or black poly?
Well, black poly is really chintzy and falls apart and wouldn't stay and wouldn't do the job. Not up to the task. Clear plastic, I think, burns it too much. I don't like what it does to the soil.
And the silage
The silage tarps are, how big they are. Those, you can get them varying sizes. They were 38 by 50. Brookdale Fruit Farm is where we get them, and he has them in different sizes. So maybe they're 100 by 30 or something like that.
Were they used, or you
No, I bought new ones, yeah. I mean, somebody gave us a used one. We tried it for a year or two, and then we bought our own. But I think what I understand from them is that the plants will grow up under them, and then they kind of die and they fall back. And it's a very gentle process, and it takes longer. 4 to 6 weeks.
Can I offer you a suggestion about folding them?
Oh, yeah?
I was in the swimming pool business for many years,
Great.
and we take very large covers off of very big commercial pools, and we accordion fold them,
Oh, interesting.
where you pull, like, say, from 5 feet, 2 people on either side of the tarp, you grab several feet, you bring it up to this end of the tarp, and do it again and again, so you have this big accordion, and then you fold them in this way towards the center. When you want to cover your field again, you unfold them, and then you just take one corner and you walk.
Walk it out. Yeah, good. All right, well, thank you.
I watching you guys fold and roll that up on your tractor. That was painful for me.
There you go. So you got
Like, I get to help you with just a
Thank
little
you.
tiny bit.
Thank you. All right. Well,
Thank you.